to the Everyday Christian Women podcast, where women get together and look to find God in their day-to-day lives. My name is Amy, I'm your hostess, and October is National Book Month, which is very exciting to me. I am an avid reader of all things in print. I also love audiobooks, so let's talk books. I grew up in a library. Almost literally, there was a library a block from my home, and my mother was a librarian when I was young. I would often go there first thing in the morning when she went to work, and I wouldn't leave until they locked the doors at night. Yes, I did get locked in the library more than once. Don't worry, they had the safety doors. I was able to get out. You can find books in almost every room of my house, including my wonderful husband built me an entire wall of bookcases in my living room. I am hoping that I will have some pictures of that for you once I get our Instagram set up for this channel, but that is still in progress. So check back later and you'll get to see some pictures of my amazing bookshelves. Answering the question of what I am reading right now can seem a little bit absurd because it really could be a question of what are you reading at this or that time of day, or what are you reading in which room of your house? What are you reading with whom? All of these things are valid questions because in the morning I read my Bible and I have a couple of books that I study. I do like to say study. I have a negative connotation that is attached to devotions for some reason, but most people would call it their devotion time. But I study, and so that I do that in the morning. And then I also have 3 books sitting on my nightstand at the moment that I read in the evenings before bed as part of her bedtime routine. My 8-month-old daughter gets read to by her daddy and me every evening, and we're not talking about children's books. We sit down together and I hold her while he reads to her from chapter books. When my 12-year-old son is visiting, we sit and read together before bed as well. He and I are currently working our way through my favorite book, which is The Host by Stephenie Meyer. It took me years to find the answer to what my favorite book is, but there you have it. The definitive answer. I am a huge fan of The Host by Stephenie Meyer, but not a huge fan of her Twilight series. So I'm glad that she wrote The Host because I think it's better writing. And how on earth do I find time to read all these various books? And yes, I really do read all of them at different times, and I absorb all of them. The only way I manage to get all this reading in is I really have built it into my routine. When I get up early in the morning, and anyone who has actually met me is probably already concerned because I did not get up early in the morning for most of my life. This has been a sort of recent development. In fact, when I told my mom I was getting up at 6 a.m., she asked if this was a cry for help. No, I just adjusted my life to enjoy my time before my day had to start. And it gives me time to start with my Bible, to start with some books that focus my mind. If we are Christians, it is absolutely imperative that we spend time with our Bibles. If you want to know how a car works, you would read the manual. If you want to know how a piece of equipment works, you read the manual. For Christians, the Bible is the manual, and it's not all easy to understand. It may not all seem relevant. A lot of times we need guidance when it comes to what we read and how to connect it to our lives. But if we want to know what God is doing in our lives, what He wants us to do in our lives, then we have to find out what He has to say. And the way that we do that is by reading our Bible. So I highly encourage you, if your Bible is not a part of your daily routine, try and make it one, even if it's small pieces at first. If you are the type who dives in all in from the beginning and you want to read it cover to cover, I admire you. That was not how I did it. I did eventually read the Bible cover to cover, but I used a specific plan that I found that is the Bible in 1 year, and it breaks it up into different pieces each day. So you're not just reading from Genesis to Revelation. You are reading pieces of the Old Testament, pieces of the New Testament, Psalms and Proverbs every day, but you spend about 20 minutes total, and those are doable chunks. Those are chunks of time that I could commit to that the reading could hold my attention, and that I wouldn't get stuck in 4 pages of genealogies in the Old Testament and give it up altogether. That is how I started in my Bible, and sometimes it was just a few verses here and there, and sometimes I really could sit down and read full chapters or even full books of the Bible. But I think that we need it in our lives. So try to find a way to incorporate the Bible into your day. Maybe it's not first thing in the morning. That's how it works best for me. It helps me focus and determine where I want my day to go. It sets the tone for the rest of my day. I can definitely tell when I break out of that routine and I don't get that into my day. It can really throw me off. But if morning time is not for you, whether it's just you're too busy, whether you are not a morning person, you don't have to do the things that I do the way that I do them. Maybe you even just start out by finding 1 or 2 verses that you would like to think about for the day. In any event, our Bible is a great way to get to know God and to connect with our faith. In addition, I typically have at least one book that my husband and I are studying together, or a devotional that we're reading together. Brad and I are currently reading The Love Dare Day by Day, a year of devotions for couples. It gives us something to share in the morning, gives us a place to start a discussion. After I've had my first cup of coffee, there is no conversation before coffee in my house. I also try to read something that helps me focus on where I need to grow. I've read quite a few books on the study of prayer, the practice of prayer. I recently finished a book on Catholic spiritual practices, which was extremely interesting and enlightening. It was a great way to get understanding of the way that Catholics practice their faith. I grew up in a Catholic home, and there are so many things that I remember that are comforting. And there are things that I had forgotten about that I have been able to reincorporate into my prayer life. This is probably shocking to some of my non-Catholics in the listening crowd, because people outside of the Catholic Church don't think of corporate memorized prayer or structured and repeated liturgy as desirable worship. But some things I love about it, some I didn't love as a kid that I can now see as very beneficial, and some I think I still wouldn't incorporate into my life now. But a lot of these things reminded me of the beauty of going to Mass and the comfort that comes from knowing what is expected of you. To this day, I could walk into a Catholic church and attend Mass and feel like I knew what was going on and I knew what was expected of me, and I could be a part of worshiping with them. Some of our churches are not as easy to do that. They can be very welcoming places, but that doesn't mean that you know what you're doing. So studying some practices that are dissimilar to what we do on a day-to-day basis, it stretches us, it teaches us a lot, and maybe we'll find something that we didn't realize we could enjoy. There are some great ways to pray that I learned from this book called Catholic Spiritual Practices that I think could benefit a lot of people, Catholic or not. That's how I start my morning when I can. There are times that it gets interrupted because a certain little girl wakes up early, or there are other responsibilities that I have to rush off into my day. But that is why I try and make that time early in the morning before I have responsibilities, the time that I focus on God. After that begins the hustle and bustle of my day, feeding small children, running errands, doing housework, talking to people. I don't typically get a lot of reading done during the bulk of my day. Occasionally I can sneak some in when the baby is napping, but there are already so many other things to do. My other really routine times for reading are to the baby right after bath time, and then after she's gone to bed, when it's time for us to settle down for bed, we climb into bed and read for a while before it's time to go to sleep. That also has meant that I need to start winding down for the night sooner so that I have time to read. That kind of program is not for everyone. And much like my morning routine, it does not always work that way. But that's kind of how I attempt to work reading throughout my day. What about you? How do you get reading into your day? Or are you able to? Are you sitting here thinking, wow, that sounds really nice. I haven't had time to sit down and read a book in the last 12 years. I understand that too. I have 4 older kids, and when they were very young, I did not do nearly as much reading. So if you're in the thick of things and reading is not really on your radar right now, I see you. I am not saying that you have to read like I do. Very few people would. In fact, most people would probably think that I'm completely crazy, and that's okay too. But if you are a reader, how are you working it into your day? How are you finding the time? When are you finding the time to read? If you are listening on YouTube, you can drop me a comment, or you are welcome to email me. My email link is in the description of the show. Let me know, how do you find time to read? And while we're at it, what are you reading? What do you like to read? In addition to books that build my faith through reinforcement of practices that I know, of ideas that I am familiar with, I also always try to incorporate things that challenge me. I just finished reading a very, very challenging book. It was hard to read. It is called Ex-Evangelicals: Loving, Living, and Leaving the White Evangelical Church. It is by Sarah McCammon. I picked it up at the library, and I really hemmed and hawed, holding it, trying to decide if I really wanted to take this home. I didn't know if I wanted to read it. It is somewhere between a memoir and an expose of growing up in the 1980s and 90s evangelical church movement. I have to stop here for just a second and define a couple of terms, because I thought that I had the definitions of these things and found out that the author does not mean the same thing I do. I've always thought that a Protestant is simply someone who is not Catholic, and that evangelical just meant Christians who were focused on spreading the word of God to other people. So that would mean that Catholics, Protestants, regardless of which Protestant faith you were part of, all of those could be evangelical, but that is not what the author is talking about. She means something very specific and very different. McCammon is talking about a specific time in history, the 1980s and 1990s, and a specific group of churches with a literal interpretation of the Bible, close-knit church communities, and a separateness from worldly influences. She also means the churches that began to exert a lot of political power during these times, and how intertwined the two things got. It was really hard to read because some of the things she talked about are things that are still central to my faith, and some of the things that she found so damaging and distasteful are things that have brought me a lot of joy and comfort. But I also see through eyes I didn't have back then. It was such an immersive culture that it doesn't surprise me now, 25 years later, why my parents were extremely concerned about my involvement in this evangelical movement. It was through an evangelical friend a couple of years older than me that I found my way to a faith based in relationship with Jesus, and I was immediately absorbed into the whole culture. It changed who I was entirely. Jesus does change your life entirely, but looking through the eyes of a parent, that had to have been terrifying. I love the connection. I love the community. The friends that were built into that faith structure were fantastic. But when you see your teenagers start to dress differently, talk differently, and sound exactly like a very vocal group of people who can seem very overwhelming, and I try to avoid the word, but it can almost seem cultish. And I know that there are those, including some of the people that the author interviewed, that is the word that they would apply to the evangelical movement. And I am quite certain that is how my parents felt about it at the time. I happen to know that my mom is listening to this, so I'd like to take this moment to apologize for terrorizing you and giving you more gray hairs in my process of finding faith. It was where my deep faith started, but it didn't give me enough foundation to hold on to as I got older and went out into the world. And I think that is one of the biggest flaws in the evangelical movement as McCammon is describing it, because evangelicals from that time frame chose to withdraw so much from anything that they considered of the world, they were raising kids who didn't have an ability to function in society. It has taken me a lot of years, many of them wandering in the desert, that a lot of experience and a lot of development to have a strong faith foundation that their brand of witnessing didn't give me as a teenager. But I still got there and I still found Jesus that way. But I look at the trauma that the author and the people she has interviewed suffered. These are clearly real experiences, and the deconstruction movement has a lot of momentum, and there's a reason for that. Overall, the book made me sad. What she and many others experienced is what makes people resistant to faith, or to find religion entirely distasteful. People most often don't hate Jesus. They find nothing wrong with Jesus. They have no problem with him. They just don't want anything to do with the people who claim to carry his message. They have no problem with Christ. They have a problem with Christians. It's been a source of joy and peace for me, but it's been a source of lifelong pain and damage for a lot of people. And for that reason, it is so heartbreaking to me. The book has been not one that I would recommend, not one that I enjoyed, but it has been very educational. I would not read it again. It did not rattle my faith the way that it could have, but it did make me sad. And it made me a little bit ashamed of the churches that are supposed to be showing Christ's love to the world around them. It's a perfect cautionary tale of why we need to be careful how we share our faith. And I am not saying that you should be a shrinking violet or hide your faith and not let other people see it. We are supposed to show who we are. But the thing is, I heard some time ago, if you live your faith, you don't have to shove it. Traditional methods of evangelism, the ones that these churches used in the 80s and 90s, are viewed with extreme suspicion in today's society. People want to know what you're selling them, and we're not selling something. We have a relationship that we want other people to know is the core of who we are, and it makes us happy. It gives us fulfillment. It is our salvation. But in very few contexts anymore is it welcome for you to walk up to someone and say, "Can I tell you about Jesus?" You are going to get a specific type of response out of most people. There's another book that I read sometime in the past, and I am going to hunt it down again because it was worth a reread. It is called Unchristian. It is by Dave Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons, and it really focuses on a lot of these things that McCammon is also talking about as to why people don't want to have anything to do with Christianity. So are we called to share our faith? Absolutely. Are we called to share our faith in a way that is going to turn people off? I hope not. This is the story of some ex-evangelicals, some people who are deconstructing their faith. And I think that we should be willing to go to our core beliefs and find out why we believe them. Do we believe them? What is it based on? Is the way we're living in line with what we say we believe? So enough heavy stuff. It was a tough book to read. I'm glad I read it, but I certainly wouldn't go back and read it again. Let's go for something a little more fun. I am also reading Patrick Stewart's autobiography. If you don't know who Patrick Stewart is, he is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Starship Enterprise, but he also is an incredible talented stage actor and was for many, many years before he was on television. His story is really interesting. I highly encourage picking up this book. I wouldn't say it's exactly a lightweight read, but his life is really interesting. He is a fascinating man, and I would love to meet him. He seems to have a great sense of humor and a lot of perspective on his own childhood and his experiences in theater. It's taken me a while to get through it. It's one of my at bedtime books, so I read a chapter here and there, but I am savoring it too. That book is titled Making It So by Patrick Stewart. Taking a short break from specific books, let's talk a little bit about where we get our books. Are you a fan of libraries? Not everyone can afford to go out and buy books. I can't afford to buy all the books that I would like. I saw a hilarious meme, and I should probably have it framed and on my wall, that says, "All of my books fit in one box, but my husband says I need to stop calling the house a box." And this is so true of me. But even I can't have all the books that I would like to have. And so I am still a huge fan of public libraries. Even libraries with somewhat limited physical catalogs have a connection to online libraries and online catalogs that open up a lot more opportunities. And if you are not familiar with your library's online catalog or how it might be connected to other libraries, I highly recommend you reach out to those wonderful librarians. They would love to tell you about it. It is such a great option for getting your hands on literature that you might otherwise not be able to. No library can carry every single book except for the Library of Congress. And I don't know about you, but I have a hard time getting there to check anything out. In addition to all of the resources that you might expect to find at a library, there are a bunch more that you might not already know about. There are spaces for your children to interact. There are classes that you can take. There are programs. I really think that if you have not been into your local library lately, you should go and give it a shot. You might meet new people, and you might find a good book to pick up for National Book Month. If you are like me and you like to buy your books, where do you buy books? There are so many retailers, both brick and mortar and online. I will tell you the secret that I almost never buy brand new books for myself. For gifts, I can justify buying brand new, but for myself, I like the fact that my dollar stretches further if I buy secondhand books. And so I really love thriftbooks.com. It's where I pick up most of my own library. I am also really blessed to have a close friend who is a small business owner. Her store, called The Heart's Desire, sells both new and used books. If you get an opportunity, please go check out her website, heartsdesire-hastings.com. And I have acquired so many great titles from her, including I got a complete set of the Cat Who Mysteries by Lillian Jackson Braun from her. If you're unfamiliar with those, they are one of my favorite series going back to those years that I grew up in a library. My mom got me hooked on them before I could reach the shelf that they were on. They are lightweight murder mysteries that keep you guessing but don't keep you up at night. The protagonist is a journalist who, with the unusual assistance of his cat, seems to figure out strange happenings and mysterious deaths. They are a lot of fun to read, and I am enjoying them just as much now as I did 30 years ago when my mom first introduced me to Coco and Quillerin. And just one more thing that we can talk about before it's time to leave. Book clubs. Have you ever been part of a book club? Have you enjoyed it? How often do you meet? Usually book clubs get together anywhere between once a week and once a month and just discuss a piece of literature. It can be a Christian women's book club. I hosted one in my house a couple years ago, and we discussed a great book by Max Lucado and then another one by Stephen Furtick, both of which were really great to discuss with about 6 to 10 other women. But they don't have to be. They can be about any book that you want them to be, anything that is a common interest between you and other women. It's a great way to have a reason, if you need a reason, to get together with other people and not have to figure out what the conversation is going to be about because you already have the subject matter decided. If you've never tried out a book club, they also exist online. You can be part of a virtual book club. Again, your library is a great resource for this. How this month can you connect with books, whether it be for yourself, for your faith, for your children? Is there a new way that you want to interact with the written word? I would really love to hear from you about your favorite books, your favorite ways to read, the ways that you work reading into your life, or even that you wish there was more time for reading in your life. You can reach me at my email, which is ECW, as in Everyday Christian Women, .amykoehn, AMYKOEHN @gmail.com. That link is also in the description of this show. Or if you are watching on YouTube, you can comment on this video. But I would just really love to continue this conversation with you. Clearly, I love books, and I would love to share this with you. Thank you for joining me for Everyday Christian Women. I look forward to talking to you again next week. And until then, I'd like you to take my personal motto with you for the week, and that is, above all else, be kind. That means be kind to others that you encounter, but you also need to be kind to yourself. Above all else, be kind and have a great week.